the area where such a church is planted, and then in the process now come up with, through the help of the Holy Spirit, the principles that will fast track your growth in such an area. So if you really just want to base it on program, you may not. That's why you discover that there are, as a ministry or organization, you may have a particular program. To drive that particular program home successfully to generate result, it will depend on the uniqueness of the drivers. Who are these drivers that I'm referring to? I'm referring to the pastors, the facilitators on the field, the evangelists, the teachers on the field, those in charge of the churches. If they are not dynamic on their own, you may discover that the same principles and teaching that works in a church, church A, may likely not work in church B. That's where the uniqueness of individual also comes to play. So you must bear this in mind. You must bear this in mind. Then aside from that, our principles alone are biblical. They transcend programs, and principles alone are biblical. They transcend programs and techniques. Principles is what drives the church. When the principles are put in place, it is the principles that drives your techniques. It is the principles that drives your program. So, and you discover a time will come, a particular program may no longer be relevant, but principles will remain. A particular techniques may not be applicable at a particular church, but the principle will remain. And that's why you must learn to discover that you may have a good program, you may have a good techniques, but if the principles are not there, you may likely not drive it. And then the next one is that principles, programs and techniques tend to change with time and culture. Honestly speaking, I've seen this. Principles is constant, but program changes. Programs and techniques changes. Like for instance, now during the COVID, all the programs you've been running, can you run the program? The COVID lockdown. Can you run the program? No. And that's what but the principles remain. So when you look at the home cells that will now return back, the church started from home cell, now returning back to it. If you really take time to look at it, I don't know about you, but the one we run by His grace is growing. We're having a lot of individuals who are joining on weekly basis. Why? Because we run it on principles, not on programs. So if your programs changes, like for instance, you're running your church or your ministry on prayer. Let me be honest with you. How many individuals have been able to come out and attend the prayer program? How many individuals? So that's where the principles comes in. You want to run a prayer ministry. How do you run it? Technically speaking, what principles do you need to put in place to drive it? If you just want to look at it, like those who run Orioke stuff, fine, it's good. But it can affect the attendance. So if you run a program, if you run your church a program, it will affect. And if it is on the techniques also, it will definitely, it changes. The way the church was run in 70s, it's not the same way the church is being run. Was run in, the way it was not the same way it was run in the 80s. The way the church was run in the 80s was not the same way it was run in the 90s. The way the church was run in the 90s, the program. You remember those days. I believe majority of you are product of the Scripture Union. But are they still strong like before? No. And so you must. But something could still be done about it. And that is if they could return back to principle. The principles they've left, they have to return back to. And so that is the reason why I said techniques and programs changes with time and culture. a particular program that really move people here, when you take such program to probably the north, it may not even appeal to anybody. The techniques adopted here in growing your church here, when you take such a technique to the east, it may likely not be applicable. So it changes with culture. So there is no one pegs fits all or size all when it comes to church growth principles. Then another is the fact that programs and techniques may be effective in one contemporary setting but not in the next. A program and techniques may be not applicable here, may work here, may help in growing the church here, but may not work in the next generation. And so because every generation is dynamic, every culture is dynamic. And so the method in US or the method in Nigeria here, if you, as a missionary, you want to go to US and you say you want to continue, if you want to adopt the same principles and the programs, the same, sorry, not principles now, the same way you run your programs here and the techniques you use there, you taking such to US, UK or Canada, you may discover that you may just be alone, may not work. And if you bring the principle, the principle from here, you take the principle from here there to drive the program and the technique, you discover that it will definitely work. It will surely work. So if you now take the techniques from, let's say, Canada, US, England, to a place like Accra, Togo, Cameroon, Burkina Faso, it might not, the program may not work. It may work for them in US, but when you take such a program to places like that I've mentioned, you may discover that it may not work. And that's why you must discover that you don't drive a church, you don't drive a ministry with programs, because trend changes. A time will come that things will change. Things will change. And when you look at now, we're in the social media generation. We're in the social media generation. Not only social media generation, we're in the what I could tag as Indomie dispensation. People want things very fast. They want things at the tip of their finger. And so that's why you got to discover. Then aside from that, some programs seems to be effective when used in a specific time frame, but with changing circumstances, they may become ineffective. Some programs may be effective at a point in time, and that's why we need to now begin to research. We now need to begin to look. The church is not just, it's a living organism. It's a living organism. And because it's a living organism, change is inevitable. And because change is inevitable, that's why a lot of individuals on the field are having problems. They believe that this is how we'll be running the program. This is how I met them doing the program. This is how I saw my fathers, my leaders running the program. See, the trends are changing. And if you are not ready to avail yourself of the available principles to drive your program, you'll be left out. You'll be left behind. That's why so many ministries today are struggling. That's why so many ministries today are struggling. Like for instance, during this lockdown, if you don't have a platform to get across to your people through social media, you discover that majority of your people will be left out. During the lockdown, you won't be able to reach out to them. More so that there was no way the church could meet except in our houses. And that's why you discover that there are some churches today, they're now deploying their leaders to be going to some centers. But if the principles have been put in place right from the day one, honestly, with the lockdown, it becomes a plus. It becomes a plus. Why? You already have a principles in place, and it is on that principle that you now run the church. But when you run it on the basis of program, there must be this program, everybody must come, this program, everybody must come. Like for instance, in some places, people must be in the church 24/7. Now with the lockdown, how would such individuals survive? How would such assemblies converge? How would they converge? And so we just got to realize that trends change. trends change as as a culture, and things keep changing. And so please, you must bear this in mind. Therefore, church worker must be grounded in biblical principles. You must be grounded as a leader, as a pastor, as an evangelist, as a prophet. You must be grounded in biblical principle. And also not only be well rooted in biblical principle, but you must also be flexible to determine what programs and techniques will best solve the challenges you are having in your churches, ministries, and organizations. You must be flexible. Don't become rigid. The world is not static, it's progressive. You must not be rigid, you must be progressive. If you are not ready, if you are not willing to be flexible in your approach to church growth, you may likely not get the desired result. That's why some youths are leaving some ministries today. That's why some youths are leaving some ministries. And you kept complaining. The youth, we don't know what is wrong with them. My friend, there is nothing wrong with them. You are not meeting their needs. You are not delivering. You are not communicating. They are not getting what you are saying. You are not feeling their heartbeats. You are not saying anything to them. You believe you're communicating. You may probably be assuming, are we not youth? Are we not once in their shoe or in their situation? It's true, you are once in their shoe. You are once in their situation. But the point is this, the trend is changing. Wake up. The trend is changing. You must be flexible. You must be flexible in your approach. Even in the style of your teaching, you must be flexible. I'm not saying you compromise. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you compromise on biblical fact. But you must be dynamic. You must be flexible. Flexibility is what drives life. You don't say, this is the principle. No, this is what we believe. This is how it must be. World without end. No, my friend, things are changing. Things are changing. Those days, individuals can afford to leave their shops to come to church. Today, how many people really want to leave their business to come to church? Bearing in mind that those days we have a small community, but now we're now having a micro community within communities. A lot of individuals are in their respective organizations, they're in their respective offices, and for Bible study, you still have to get the Bible study across to them. You still have to ensure that they're still part of what you are doing. That is still part of flexibility. But if you compulsorily, they must come for the program, this and that. See, things are changing. You must be flexible. But however, you must be rooted. You must be rooted in, you must have the clear understanding of biblical principles on church growth. So you must be flexible. You must be flexible to determine what program or what techniques will really suit or solve the challenges you have in your church. So you have to look at all this, and I really want you to look at this. What are the areas of your challenges? I want you to look at what are the areas, practically speaking now, what are the areas of your challenges? What are those areas? Identify those areas, list them out after summarizing all that you've listened to in this lesson for today. You take time to summarize that. Not only that, then you now identify the areas of challenges, area where you're having challenges. Identify them. Then, with what you've heard in the course of this class, then now begin to identify what you believe could be done to better or solve the challenges you are having in those local assembly. I look forward to receiving this from you. I look forward to receiving, and as usual, you send your report in type form. You send it, you get it across to my email, babatunde065@gmail.com. Send it. I look forward to receiving. And in case there are some other principles and that you believe are not, you probably stumble on. And then also, in addition to the assignment, I also want you to identify at least not less than about 15 different biblical principles, applied principles that people adopt out there in addition to the assignment, and then take time to explain how those techniques, applied principles, natural principles based on revelations are adopted by those individuals you know very close to you adopt such principle. Get them across. I look forward to receiving them, and this is to be submitted in the next 3 days. I give you the next 3 days to get this across. Thank you. See you next class. Remain blessed and keep growing.